Kia ora mai, this is Mike Atkinson. This presentation is looking at two advanced compass travel techniques. One is called back bearing and the other is boxing. And the context of these techniques are when you're following a bearing and you come across an obstacle that you can't go through and you have to go around somehow. Back bearing is 180 degrees different from your original bearing. Now you can use a back bearing if you want to return, if you're following a bearing and you want to return to your original point traveling along that same line. You can use it to check for accuracy of your travel by looking back at your last feature to check that you're on the right line. And you can also use it to realign yourself with a bearing if you have to detour around an obstacle. So the process of getting a back bearing is to leave the compass on the original setting and of the original bearing and just rotate the whole compass around until the white needle is sitting on top of the red orienting arrow there. So rather than red in the shed, you've got white in the shed. So you do not rotate the bezel at all, just move the whole compass in your body, turning around until white is in the shed, and then you've got 180 degrees difference from your original bearing. So in this example here, we have a lake. There is the obstacle you need to get around, and your bearing. You're traveling along this bearing here, and your feature that you are heading towards was this obvious tree. That's the marker, your feature that you're heading towards. So this compass here has got red in the shed, and you're following that bearing, and you've come across this lake. So you've come to the tree, and you need to get around. Now, so what you need to be able to do is walk around the obstacle to the other side. When you get to the other side of the lake, you want to make sure that you're on the same line here. So you do a back bearing. So you just turn your whole compass around so that the white needle is in the shed. So rather than red in the shed, it's white in the shed, which doesn't sound as good, but it's a way of checking. So all you've done is 180 degrees around and line up the direction of travel arrow with that last marker. So you need to be able to see that marker, that feature that you were originally on. And once you've lined up with that, then you can turn the compass back around so red's in the shed and keep following along this line of your original line. And then therefore, in theory, this whole line here should be the original line bearing that you're on. When you have it come across an obstacle when you're following a bearing and you can't use a back bearing, which probably means that you can't see back towards the feature that we're traveling towards once you're on the other side of the obstacle, then you have to use a method called boxing. I'd like to show an example of boxing. We've got the 6 steps here, and this is our obstacle that we want to get around, and this is our bearing here that we're following, 315 degrees, and this is the line of the bearing, our direction of travel arrow following this way, but we need to go around this obstacle. So depending on whether you want to go left or right of the obstacle, in this example we're going to go to the right, so you want to add 90 degrees to your original bearing. So adding 90 to 315 gives you a bearing of 45. So rotate your bezel to 45 and then follow your direction of travel arrow along that bearing. Now, as you're traveling along this bearing of 45 degrees, you need to pace out or measure the distance from where you left your original bearing until you're on the edge of the obstacle here. So usually counting double paces is a good idea, and if there's more than one person with you, then one person can be following that bearing of 45 degrees and the other person can be counting the double paces. Once you have gone around the edge of the obstacle, then you need to go back to your original bearing of 315. So rotate your bezel until you're 315 degrees, and then follow that until you get past that edge of the second edge of the obstacle. And then when you are past that edge of the obstacle, you need to go back at right angles or 90 degrees back towards the left. So you need to subtract 90 degrees off your bezel. So it gives you a bearing of 225. So 315 minus 90 gives you 225. And then you follow that bearing for the same distance, horizontal distance, or double paces that you've counted as you did along this section here. And finally, once you're back to this, back to the same distance that you left your original bearing from here, back along there, then you add back to 90 degrees or back to the original bearing of 315, and in theory, you're in the same line as you originally were.